This is another introductory lecture to our course, and I just want us to think a little bit about the nature of personhood. What is a person? And we're going to look a little bit at cultural views of personhood. So there's going to be a kind of meta framing of our course. We're going to try and locate our course within a European tradition of thinking in psychology and in social psychology, and we're going to see how can we incorporate African views into thinking about personhood and persons in social psychology. So this lecture is going to be in three parts. The first one is going to be personhood and culture, and we're going to be contrasting over here the Western view and the African view of personhood. Then we're going to move on in the second part and see, well, how psychology historically reflected a Western view of personhood. And in the final section, we're going to consider the question, is it possible to take some themes from the African view of personhood and incorporate those into social psychology to produce a social psychology that has relevance for the African context, that reflects on its roots? And we're going to see how we can weld some traditions within social psychology with some ideas in terms of African views of personhood to create a perspective or view of social psychology that is rooted in Africa and that has application in our context here. So this is from Wikipedia. What's a person? It's quite interesting actually how they define a person. Well, first is in terms of a capacity. Persons are able to do things. We can reason moral reasoning, we have consciousness, we can reflect on ourselves, and we have the ability to enter into social relations with others. Now, of course, many machines have capacities, but what differentiates the kind of machine we are as persons is, the second point there, is culture. We are encultured. All of these capacities that we've studied are things that come down through us through culture. Of course, machines don't get their capacities through culture, but we do. And of course, because of that, persons differ across culture, because their capacities, their tastes, etc., are shaped by their cultural context. And then the third defining feature, according to Wikipedia, is identity. We all have a unique sense of ourselves, a sense of continuity. We started over here, we can tell a kind of autobiographical narrative of ourselves. When we wake up tomorrow, we'll still believe we're the same person that we were today. And of course, that belief in who we are shapes our tastes, our views, our behaviors. So there's a personhood in a nutshell, in three defining features. So of course, the view of personhood itself is shaped by culture, and the Western view has been defined by Burkett and many others as the person as a monad, the solitary individual. The focus in the Western view of personhood is the individual, as described there by Burkett in that quote. We carry our uniqueness deep inside us. We have to go and find what kind of person are we really? Our personality, our characters deep in, like pearls within their shells, like pearls within an oyster. There's our personhood inside us. And of course, it's solitary. We're all our own persons. We're divided from other persons. The skin is the boundary. And we are self-contained. We don't really need others. Social bonds are secondary. So that is how psychologists and others have described this Western view of personhood. And I'm drawing here from an African philosopher by the name of Menkiti. The African view of personhood is in stark contrast to this Western view. Firstly, it's collective, that persons are defined by their embeddedness in communities of persons. It's not focused on the lone individual, but personhood is an accomplishment. You'll notice here the second view is processual. It's accomplished. Personhood is accomplished in community, and it's through a process of incorporation. When you incorporate it into a community, so you gain your personhood. And without incorporation, full personhood doesn't apply. And he's got quite an interesting way of making this case, of arguing for this collective and processual nature of being in an African worldview. Persons become persons only after a process of incorporation. And he uses the example, a language example. You could say, for example, we rushed the child to the hospital, but before we arrived, it was dead. You'll notice the use of the word it, objectifying, not yet a person. And of course, we would never say this about adults. We'd never say we rushed the person, or we rushed John or Jill to hospital, but before we got there, it was dead. You'd never say that about adults, because the personhood is already fully formed. And Minkiti also uses other examples about death rituals in history in African societies. There were much less death rituals around unincorporated children that died. So when they're very young children, before they incorporate into the community, in contrast to Western rituals of mourning around death. And so you see this contrast in the self-contained individual, the monad, the Western view, and the collectivist view of personhood in the African worldview. And Nkiti, this is a picture from his paper there. He contrasts it over here. So the society is primary in the African worldview. And society produces, through this process of incorporation, individuals. Individuals are secondary. In contrast, in the Western view, the individuals are primary. And those individuals are self-contained, they're their own units, and different kinds of individuals come together and they produce society. So it's the relative emphasis on the collectivistic view of personhood versus the individualistic view, Western view of personhood. So in the Western view, the individual becomes a person through their own choices, their own decisions, their own activities, their own labor. It's a self-project. And then the community is just a collection of these monads, these individuals. In the African view, by contrast, there's an organic relationship between the society and the individuals that it produces. So it's a much more this kind of collectivistic view. And if you look at Mkhize, for example, Mkhize's work, this collectivistic view extends into the ancestors as well. You're part of a much broader community. And in the African worldview, in contrast to the Western worldview, duty trumps self-interest. So the Western view is individuals are primarily self-interested, driven by self-interest. And it's not only in the African worldview, but also in Asia. Duty trumps self-interest. And you can see this very clearly in the response to the corona pandemic. In the East, people obeyed. They were much more obedient in the collective sense of we've got to be dutiful over here and protect our neighbors, whereas there was much more emphasis on individual rights, not to wear masks, etc. in Western lands. Okay, so there's our contrast between the individualistic Western view and the collectivistic African view. Now, you'll see, if you look, I'm sure you've noticed this as well in your general studies in psychology. Psychology tends to be an individualistic discipline, and we're going to see how social psychology has also gained this kind of individualism or this worldview from the Western culture. Of course, psychology itself it has these kind of Western traditions, and there's this whole move to Africanize psychology, to think about psychology and social psychology through an African lens, an African worldview. So here's the theoretical individualism. The focus on psychology is focused on the individual, and even the individual themselves is taken apart to a set of components. So if you look through your undergraduate textbook, you'll see there's a chapter on emotion, there's a chapter on cognition, there's a chapter on personality. Each of these different components of the person are then broken down into different processes, and you've got different specialists studying, for example, memory, others are studying attention, these different components. So it's this fragmented view of the individual. So the focus is on the individual and the components that make up that individual's personality and the way they tick, as it were. And in addition to this theoretical individualism, there's also methodological individualism that psychologists focused on individuals in their studies, individual minds, individual brains. They look at, in social psychology, the effect of situations on individuals, and they measure. I'm sure you've all filled out Likert scales and other psychological tests. They're all measuring properties of you. What are your beliefs? How depressed are you? Are you prone to conformity? Are you prone to anger? And then we compare people in this situation that have grown up in these kinds of conditions versus individuals that have grown up in those kind of conditions, or individuals subject to this stimulus compared to the individual subject to that stimulus. And of course, the gold standard of research, the clinical trial, the experimental trial, is a classic example of this individualistic focus, where we administer a drug and a placebo to two different groups. We measure the individuals, the reaction that these drugs have on two different individuals, and we use a very similar design in social psychology. So we've got theoretical individualism, focusing on personality and the different component parts of the individual, how their minds work. And then we've got methodological individualism, the focus on individuals, measuring qualities and properties of individuals and how situations affect them. And that's, of course, covered in this very definition of social psychology that we considered in a previous lecture, the scientific fields that seeks to understand the causes of individual behavior in social situations. You put this individual in that situation, this individual in that situation, how do situations affect those individuals? Theoretical and methodological individualism. So here are some features of individualistic approaches to the discipline of social psychology in the material from Kendra Cherry. It's on the website. You can go and look at that introductory things you should know about social psychology. It's a general introduction. It focuses on, she's defining social behavior. It focuses on social psychology. Social behavior is goal-oriented. So in an individualistic approach, those goals are individual goals. It's often for money, in wealth, status, material gain. How are you going to make a profit? What's going to be in your best interest? Or what is not functional in your goals? So it's goal-oriented behavior, it's individual goals. It does focus on social interactions, of course, the social context. How does this context affect a person like you? How does this other context affect a person like this? So we're looking at the interaction between the situation, individuals, but it's still individualistic. It focuses on how, and this is so true if you think about your own life, we spend a great deal of time processing how we've behaved in situations. We consider social situations. We reflect on how we behave. We think, I shouldn't have responded like that. Next time I must respond like that. Or notice how that person responded. So we do this through these comparison and appraisal processes. We're continually evaluating ourselves. And of course, in social psychology, this is the individualistic process of self-evaluation. And of course, we evaluate the behaviors of others, stereotypes. So I have my stereotype of this lady over there, for example. What is she like? What is she going to do? The woman in the picture. The final bullet point there, we infer personality from behavior. So we look at others, we look at their behavior, and we think, what kind of persons they are. So even in our own thinking, we're thinking individualistic about the kind of person we're dealing with over here. So this over here is an individualistic approach. Contrast this with a more social psychological approach. And this is the focus of the third section of this lecture. We want to think now, can we take social psychological interests in situations, behavior, the effect of others on our behavior, the effect of situations on our behavior, and instead of using this individualistic frame, looking at personality and individuals, can we start looking at collectives, and especially from that African worldview, how does the individual become an individual? And the individual they are in that collective, how are they incorporated into the collective to be the kind of person that they are? And so we going to, in this course, work towards, we can call it a collectivist and interactionist view of social psychology. It demonstrated so beautifully in that picture over here. That's where England scored a goal in the 2018 World Cup, and this is one of the places where the English fans came together in pubs to watch the game. Can you see there the emotions that are being displayed? This utter joy, this elation. Yes, we've scored a goal. Look at it. And it's in unison. Everyone's together. It's not like this person's feeling this. It's a collective feeling of joy. It's a collective feeling of celebration. Each individual there, of course, is feeling something. They're part of it. But it's this greater thing, the collective. The situation, the goal, England, we're going to win, that is transcendent. And so we're looking, if you look at the bullet points over there, this is much closer to the Africanist view of self than it is to the Western view of self. Social behavior is goal-oriented, but are those individualistic goals? No, these are collective goals, they're shared goals. They all share the goal of England winning. It's a shared goal, it's not an individualistic goal. Individual situation interaction. Well, who's acting over here? There's collective action, there's genuine collective action. All those individuals, they each play a part, but they erupt together in joy. It's a collective process. And we can often view social psychological process as collective forms of behavior, not a whole lot of individuals coming together and acting together. The motive itself, the goal, is collective. There are shared processes of appraisal and thinking. Collective thinking, collective appraisal, collective evaluation. We the greatest over here, yes, or the opposite. So our thoughts and our feelings, even though they're personal, even though each individual over there is feeling this and thinking something, there's something absolutely collective about it. And of course, very clearly in life is stereotyping. These stereotypes are often collective. The view of who we are is often not just me as an individual, but it's us as a collective, as South Africans, as psychology students, as supporters of Bafana Bafana, or supporters of this team or that team. And of course, when England got eliminated from the World Cup, the whole collective mood changed. Those shared goals, the collective action, the shared feeling. And once again, this happened in unison. There was a collective immediate mourning at that time of being eliminated from the World Cup. So we can generally talk about emotions, not just as belonging to individuals, but you can display, look at the misery on the faces. Yes, it is felt by those individuals, but it's a collective emotion felt by everyone together. The shared feelings, the shared thoughts, the collective action, the shared goals haven't been achieved. And so we can think of thoughts and feelings, instead of being inside us, we can think of these thoughts and feelings as something that's shared across society. Think about your own society, your own situation, the mood in the country at present as you watch this lecture. What are the collective thoughts, the collective feelings? Is it very optimistic, or perhaps is it pessimistic? So these emotions can be, they're shared and they can be collectively expressed. Of course, our behaviors are also coordinated collectively. As in a sports team, to win, you have to coordinate your behavior, but your behaviors are also coordinated collectively. Just think of the routines of life. Going off to school, others going to work. There's this order, there's this collective order within society. And of course, very important for social psychology and for this course, we have a common sense of identity, a sense of who we are. Our place in the order isn't my individual identity, but it's a sense of me as a lecturer, as a student, as a Manchester United supporter, as a person that loves soccer, as opposed to a person that loves rugby, for example. Collective, shared identities of who we are, collective tastes, thoughts, feelings. And so this introduces us to what John Turner and Penelope Oakes many years ago, 1986, they called the paradox of social psychology. And this is the paradox that's going to drive this course. It's the kind of thinking that we're going to try and develop in the course. And this is, look at the quote there, the point of social psychology is to resolve scientifically a paradox. What is a paradox? Well, it's to integrate two different levels of the phenomenon. And we're going to discuss that in the next lecture, this notion of levels of analysis. So we've got the psychological level on the one hand, and it's got to do with the mental properties of individuals, because it's individuals that think, that feel, that plan, that have motives. But of course, and the social processes, the second level. The social processes, the properties, the products are derived from social factors, group relations, interpersonal attraction, etc. So we've got these group and collective processes, and we've got these individual processes, and how can we integrate them? And that we're going to consider in the next lecture. That is the paradox of social psychology. How can we work towards a psychology? It's about us as individuals, but that's rooted in the context and collectives, the world that we live in, the communities that we live in. How are we incorporated, as Mkiti says, how are we incorporated into the social psychological community? How do we act then as members of the social psychological community? And that is the end of our